So for all of you who think that Dune is a white savior story, read Dune Messiah, because literally the first chapter is an interview with this guy basically going, you know Muad'Dib? Yeah, he is not a good person. He basically is a ruthless, vicious dictator that allowed his Fremen tribe to go across the entire universe, perform their jihad, killing billions, and allowing all these people to die. Yeah, he's not a good person. I mean, the first 2 chapters of the book aren't even story. It's literally just background information going, yeah, Paul Atreides as Emperor is not a good person. Yeah, you see a little Timothée Chalamet, he's not a good person. Muad'Dib is evil. I mean, we do sort of get Paul's reasoning through his monologues where it's like, he allowed the Fremen to commit this jihad because the jihad that he foresaw was even worse, so he'd rather the lesser of 2 evils and let the Fremen commit this jihad. But it just doesn't make sense. Like, Paul, no, you don't allow mass murder to happen under your watch as Emperor. Like, what are you doing, man? That's not cool. Anyways, Dune Messiah is a much shorter book than the original Dune. It's a lot more concise, but it also does suffer from the same issue I have with the first book, and that is Frank Herbert's writings. He loves just info dumping, just information all over the place, jumping perspectives, all that stuff. It's all still there in Dune Messiah, so if you didn't like that in the first book, you're not going to love it in Dune Messiah either. So to simplify the story, the Bene Tleilax, think of the Bene Tleilax as like the Tyrell Corporation from Blade Runner, where they basically make human clones. We'll call them clones, they're called Golas, but basically the Bene Tleilax, along with Scythed, who is a Tleilaxu face dancer, so think of him as like a faceless man from Game of Thrones. They basically want to take Paul Atreides' Chome Company holdings. The Chome Company is basically this place that like distributes the spice across the entire universe. Paul has the majority stake since he is Emperor of the known universe. They basically want to get Paul's stakes in the Chome Company, and to do so, they create a Gola, a clone version of Duncan Idaho. They give it to Paul. The whole time you're thinking, oh, this Gola is sent to kill Paul Atreides. I mean, Paul literally goes, are you here to kill me? And I think Duncan goes, yes, I'm programmed to kill you. I might be misremembering that, but the whole thing is just a decoy because Chani is finally pregnant with twins after Princess Irulan had been feeding her contraceptives for like 15 years, which then complicates the birth, and Paul gets visions of Chani dying during childbirth. Sound very familiar? Yes, Star Wars. And also The Matrix Revolutions, or Reloaded. What's the second one called again? I don't remember. I don't care. And so the whole point of the Duncan Idaho Gola, which is called Hate, but everyone calls him Duncan, like there's literally a point where the Gola's like, oh, I'm Hate. And everyone's like, can I call you Duncan? And he's just like, no. And everyone just calls him Duncan. And so the whole point of the Duncan Idaho Gola is to show to Paul Atreides that you can unlock the memories of the original person a Gola is made from. Because Chani dies in childbirth, and essentially the third act, the big climax of the book, is everyone just standing around in a room. The twins are born in their beds. Paul is blind, but using his prescience is still able to see. But after Chani dies, he stops allowing the prescience to take over, so he is literally just blind. You have Gola Duncan Idaho freaking out, like, you know, becoming loyal to House Atreides once again, but also fighting his primal conditioning of not to kill Paul Atreides. And then you have Scythed, the Tleilaxu face dancer, basically going, yeah, we want your Chome Company holdings, give it to us. We can make a Gola version of Chani and you can be reunited with your love again. You won't be Emperor, but we will give you Chani back. And Paul's like, it wouldn't be her anyways. And because Paul's children are pre-born, because obviously Chani was a Fremen and prone to spice addiction, Paul is able to have a mental link with his children so he can see through the eyes of his children. So he kills Scythed, but because he's blind and Paul is essentially Fremen now, there's a saying and a tradition by the Fremen that the blind people go into the desert to die. So essentially Paul gives up the throne to his children. He leaves Aaliyah in charge as regent, and he just goes off into the desert and is never seen again. Oh yeah, and there's also this dwarf character called Bajaz who like helps unlock Duncan Idaho's real memories, but I swear to God, if they cast Peter Dinklage as this dwarf, not that I don't think Peter Dinklage would do a great job, I mean he would, but I mean it's just like, find another dwarf actor because Peter Dinklage is just ingrained in my brain as Tyrion Lannister. So that's a really quick summary of the plot of Dune Messiah, and Dune Messiah to me is interesting because this is where a lot of the meat of the Dune saga comes from. This is technically the end of the Paul Atreides story, kind of. I mean, you'll see more of it in Children of Dune, but just in terms of as Paul Atreides, the Muad'Dib, this is the end of it. Paul rose to the top and he fell hard. Another thing that's interesting about Dune Messiah is that this is the book in the Dune saga that most science fiction tends to rip off or, borrow from. Obviously, the premonitions of Chani dying in childbirth was taken by Star Wars with Padme and Anakin. Paul Atreides' character arc, in a way, is the fall of Anakin Skywalker. And the entire thing about the Golas is pretty much inspired replicants in the Blade Runner universe. Because, one, a way to tell if you're a replicant is by looking in the eyes, and a way to tell if you're a Gola is by looking in the eyes. And then, of course, the whole idea and concept of, can a Gola be human? Can they unlock the traits that made them the human that they once were? That is a massive theme in Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, which is fitting because Denis Villeneuve directed Blade Runner 2049 and he wants to make a Dune trilogy adapting Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, and then Dune Messiah. And I think he would absolutely nail Dune Messiah because Blade Runner 2049 is such a rich thematic film. Granted, the pacing is really, really bad in that film, but in terms of, from a filmmaking standpoint, Denis Villeneuve, his whole filmmaking career essentially has been training to make Dune Messiah. And I really want him to make Dune Messiah because I want to see Timothée Chalamet play Emperor Paul. Because Emperor Paul is fascinating to me. In many ways, he is that child from the first Dune book. The one that is weighed by the world a little bit. He's got the whole world on his shoulders and he hates the idea of being super famous. His first chapter is him coming home and being like, I like dressing as a common person because no one recognizes me as Paul, Emperor Muad'Dib. But then you also see the much darker side to Paul Atreides and the way he treats most people that isn't Chani or the people closest to him. The way he treats Irulan is horrific and horrendous. Their whole opening argument where Irulan is like, can you impregnate me? I need to bear the Atreides child. And Paul is like, I'm not touching you. I told you that. I only married you for political advantage. The person that will bear my child is Chani. And then Irulan's just like, but Chani hasn't conceived in all the years you've tried. And Paul's just like, I don't care. And then Irulan's just like, fine, I'll find a lover. And Paul's like, okay, fine, but you're not to have a child. And she's like, why not? And Paul's like, if you have a child with someone that isn't mine, that child will not be welcome in my house. I was like, damn, Paul Atreides changed. This is not the wide-eyed teenager I saw at the beginning of Dune. What the hell happened to this guy? Adult Paul Atreides is very selfish, and you can see that in the way he governs. He sort of just goes, okay, is the spice production good? Okay, is everything running in order? Okay, cool, fine, right. Okay, what's happening with Chani? Drop everything and help Chani. He's very selfish in that regard. And speaking of Irulan, Irulan is a character that was interesting, sort of, but, not really. She's part of the big conspiracy council with the Benny Tlaylax and Reverend Mother guys, Helen Mahayam, and some other people. Is Bajaz on it? I don't remember. And so Irulan is set up to be an interesting antagonist. My problem is that by the end of the novel, Irulan kind of just admits that she's in love with Paul Atreides. When Paul walks off into the desert, she basically goes, I'm going to protect the twins because I loved him all along. And that was just weird to me. I didn't feel that behind the cold and callous conversations they had, she did love him. Especially since she did feed Chani all the contraceptives, which essentially messed up her childbirth. I don't know, there is just something about Irulan that it didn't work for me 100% in a way. And I hope that's something that, if Messiah ever gets adapted, the filmmakers will find a way to make Irulan more understandable and more likable. Or maybe not likable, but more sympathetic. I need to understand why she does what she does. Oh, a character I thought that was heavily underutilized was Stilgar. And that's mainly because Stilgar is kind of just there being like, oh, Muad'Dib, I will follow you around, that's it. Stilgar's character arc in a way doesn't really culminate until Children of Dune, where it's him realizing that Paul Muad'Dib is just a man. But I don't know, for a character that is kind of important, Stilgar doesn't feel important. Oh, and I will say, I really did miss the presence of Lady Jessica in this book, because Jessica is one of the great characters in the Dune saga, and she's not in this book because she's too busy having a vacation on Caladan. But I don't know why Frank Herbert wrote out Jessica, because even if Jessica was there, she wouldn't really have, made that much of a difference in terms of Paul still would have fallen for the trap by Skytel and the Tleilaxu face dancers. That still would have happened even if Jessica was there. I don't know if that's because Frank Herbert thought he needed to expand the role of Aaliyah a little bit more, and by having Jessica there, it would undermine having Aaliyah in the story at all. So I wonder why Jessica isn't in the book for that particular reason. But inherently, Dune Messiah is kind of a sad book. It ends, Paul is now blind. Totally, the Matrix totally didn't rip that off. Neo in a way is kind of like Paul Atreides, but not really. He has the prescience that allows him to see glimpses into the future. Neo, of course, in Matrix Revolutions goes blind and can still see, which again happens to Paul in Dune Messiah. But at the end of the day, although he shares resemblances to Paul Atreides, the Matrix films don't really delve into the whole Messiah angle. I mean, they mention it in Matrix Reloaded, but they don't really go into it. But yeah, at the end of the day, Neo is just an allegory for Jesus that just happens to borrow traits from Paul Atreides. But in summary, Dune Messiah is a sad book. I mean, Paul Atreides, the character that we saw at the beginning of Dune, has changed, become an evil dictator, but you also feel sad for him because we see it through his point of view at times. We understand his pain, and at the end of the book, he essentially loses everything. He goes off into the desert, blind, unable to see, to die. I will say, Aaliyah's relationship with Duncan is kind of weird, because, I mean, she's like 16 and Duncan is like 30-something. I don't know, it just feels a bit weird, and Frank Herbert does get a little bit weird later on, especially in Children of Dune with Leto and Ganima, and just... It's weird. Okay, here's something that's been bugging me, and I want to bring this up. At the end of Dune Messiah, Paul names his children Leto II and Ganima. Now, Leto II is also the name of Paul's first child he has in Dune. So, shouldn't Leto II in Dune Messiah be known as Leto III? I mean, yes, that child died, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that the child still lives, so Leto II should actually be Leto III, right? I mean, that's how it happened in the English monarchy. Like, you had Edward I, he died, and then, like, generations later, when Edward II was born, you had Edward II. Doesn't ignore the fact that the original Edward II wasn't called Edward I. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But at the end of the day, Dune Messiah is a sad book. Essentially, it's the fall of Paul Atreides. We see Paul Muad'Dib, the Messiah, fall from grace. We hear about the atrocities he's committed across the known universe. And it's really bad because we still see the young Paul Atreides from the first book. In the bits where we are privy to Paul's thoughts, we still know the same child. He doesn't like the responsibility, but still, he commits those horrific acts. And by the end of the book, he loses his wife and his eyesight, and he can't bear to live without his wife, so he just goes off into the desert to die. It's sad and tragic, and kind of the perfect endpoint for the Dune saga for me, because I'm reading Children of Dune. I'm about a third of the way through it, and although I like the writing and I like the world, I kind of just don't care for the story. Like, to me, Dune lived with Paul Atreides. And the rest of the saga moving forwards just gets a bit weird. I like the overall story for Children of Dune fine, although I haven't finished it, obviously, but, like, watching breakdowns, reading synopsis, I like the story, it's fine. But getting to God Emperor, I don't know what shit Frank Herbert was smoking, but, like, what the fuck was he on? Like, huh? So in many ways, I think Dune Messiah is the perfect ending to the Dune saga, the Paul Atreides story, whatever you want to call it. I really enjoyed the book, and yeah, I will hopefully be back with a Children of Dune review. And that'll probably be my last Dune book review, because I can't really see myself getting into God Emperor. Like, just... It just seems too weird for me. But what do you guys think about Dune Messiah? Have you read it? Are you excited about this book eventually possibly becoming a film directed by Denis Villeneuve? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, see you guys next time.